Emmanuel Macron is under increasing pressure over rising fuel prices in France. A mass blockade of roads is planned for later this month, and opinion polls are showing widespread support for the demonstration. The French president is going on radio this morning to defend his policy. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now in the studio by Alistair Sanford. Good morning, Alistair.
Good morning, Belle.
A campaign that looks to be gathering momentum, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And there have already been some impromptu small-scale protests with drivers carrying out go-slow operations in parts of France last weekend. The main rally is due to take place a week on Saturday. It's being dubbed the Yellow Vest protest. Why? Because it's compulsory in France for drivers to keep yellow vests in their cars in case of accidents. They've been displaying them already on dashboards as a gesture of support for the protest. It has echoes of a similar protest a few years ago, which was dubbed the Red Hats protest, which succeeded in bringing about the downfall of a planned eco-tax. Now, the details now: the price of diesel has gone up by over 20% in a year, petrol by some 15%. Costs are high in France, amongst the highest in Europe, although in fact prices have stabilised in recent weeks. The government says the main reason is global oil prices, which have been on the rise. But the anger in France is about fuel taxes, which the government has been bringing in progressively over the last few years, and there are plans for another substantial hike in January. Now, the government says its long-term policy is of ecological transition towards more environmentally friendly cars, and that's all part of that. But many French people say we simply can't afford those cars at the moment. They don't live in urban areas. They often find it hard to make ends meet, and they're on very tight budgets.
So the government is making efforts to try and tackle this problem. So is it reasonable for the demonstrators to be taking it out against Macron? Yes,
well, as in many other areas of French life, the president is very closely associated with these policies, and he's been on the front line defending it. Now, the hostility certainly plays into a general anti-Macron feeling where he's seen to be out of touch with ordinary people. His popularity's taken a dive. An example over the fuel taxes: there's one anti-Macron tirade which a woman put on Facebook, and that's been shared. The video's been shared some 250,000 times. Now, the Environment Minister has made her own selfie video refuting those points and explaining the government's policy. As you've said, Macron is giving an interview on French radio this morning. He's already spoken in the press, to some extent giving as good as he gets, saying, I prefer a tax on fuel to a tax on work, and saying also the same people who grumble about fuel prices also demand we fight pollution because when our children get sick. But he and the government do acknowledge that people are in difficulty. They're looking at ways to help them financially, but on the overall policy, Macron and his government are very much sticking to their guns.